Hello, Bună ziua, as my friends in Moldova would say. Good day. Hello, Bună ziua. Today we are studying Ecclesiastes chapters 9 and 10, and we are getting close to the end of Ecclesiastes. Bob Hope once received an award, and he said, I don't deserve this. But I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. Uh, Solomon's been telling us that what we think we deserve or what don't deserve doesn't have any bearing on what God's plan is for us. But one thing for sure, Solomon says that we will all die. So he begins chapter 9 with a statement about death is a common destiny for all. So we'll start in verse 1 of chapter 9. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands. But no one knows whether God's favor or God's disfavor awaits them. He says you can't use righteous deeds to gain control over God, and you can't use them to gain influence on blessings for them because you're not entitled. Verse 2 says, we all share a common destiny. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifice, those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who swear an oath, so it is with those who are afraid to swear an oath. This is the same evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live. And then afterward, they join the dead. So, Solomon continues to make observations from the world's perspective. And his conclusion is that under the sun, then you're done. You can take your vitamins, drink your fruit and veggie smoothies, lay off the big gulps and southern fried foods. You can exercise every day. You can drink water instead of Coke. And he says you're still going to die. And you won't even be able to predict when. But despite all of that, Solomon concludes that living is still better than dying. And he explains. And you're given a chance to express your opinion too. Anyone who's among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. We don't appreciate the perspective of that day about dogs. Dogs were considered mangy mongrels, and they generally ran in packs in the street, and people were afraid of them. And to any citizen group, they represented the worst, if not the lowest, form of life. And as bad as a dog's life was, he says it's still better than the most noble beast, the king of the jungle, the lion, if the lion's dead. For the living know that they will die. But the dead know nothing. They have no future reward. Their name is even forgotten. Their love, their hate, their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have part of anything that happens under the sun. We keep reminding ourselves that this phrase, under the sun, is our worldly perspective on things. So Solomon is still focused on life under the sun, not the life in the sun, not in Jesus. And T.D. Jakes says in his book, Maximize the Moment, God's Action Plan for Your Life, He says, remember that every day is God's gift to you. What do you do with your gift from God? So in the next 6 verses, Solomon tells us to make the most of our lives before time overtakes us. His 4 imperatives are go, eat, drink, and do. He says life's short, death is certain. Make the life you have meaningful. In Luke 19, we studied the parables of the 10 minas, where God taught us that making life meaningful meant being good stewards of what He's given us until Jesus comes again. He says we will be judged as Christians on our stewardship. And our mission is a partnership with God. And God is set to redeeming a lost world and renewing creation. And He's invited us to be a partner with that. That's why we put so much emphasis on the Great Commission in Matthew 28. Going and making disciples. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white. Always anoint your head with oil. Wear garments of celebration. Affirm your blessings from God. You know, every once in a while we get reminded that we're supposed to act like that we're children of God and we've been saved and we've got an eternal future, rather than the scowling face of distrust and disappointment and anger and hurt. He says, God has already approved of you. You are already clothed in white. He's already anointed your head with oil. So act like you're part of the celebration. So how do you affirm your blessings from God? How do you affirm them to Him? How do you affirm them to others? How do you affirm them to yourself? Verse 9 says, enjoy life with your wife whom you love all the days, this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Sort of have a blast while you last. Perhaps Solomon in his old age was beginning to regret all of the wives and concubines that he had during his lifetime. He says, enjoy your wife. Enjoy your husband while you can. Verse 10, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. The word hand here contains the idea of ability. And the word find here includes the idea of opportunity. God uses that idea very often. He says, as you are going, make disciples. He says, if you want to know my will as you are going, I will show you. So it's very much the idea of as you are going, do what you find is an opportunity. Use your hands. Use the abilities that you're given to do what is put before you. Every once in a while, I'll go out there and read the street sweeper sermon that encourage people, even if you're a street sweeper, do the best you can. I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealthy, To the brilliant are favor to the learned, but in time and chance things happen to them all. You may be swift, strong, wise, brilliant, or learned. He says it doesn't come with guarantees. Time and chance have a way of disrupting your plans. Moreover, no one knows when this hour of death will come. He says it's like fish caught in a cruel net. They weren't expecting it. Or birds taken in a snare they weren't expecting. So it is with people trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly on them. How foolish we are to think that we're in control. We're more like the little fish caught in the net or the bird snared in the trap. George Bernard Shaw said, "Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch which I've got to hold on for a moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before I hand it on to a future generation." Now, Solomon's going to give us a little bit about wisdom is better than folly, or avoid foolishness at all cost. Do we need that reminder sometime? The dictionary definition of fool, one who is deficient in judgment, sense, or understanding. So in the next 7 verses, Solomon warns about being a fool, about acting foolish. In Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes, which are Solomon's wisdom literature, he refers to fool, fools, foolish, and folly 128 times to contrast his wisdom lifestyle. And David says in his psalm, "A fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." Luke refers to a person who relied on his wealth as a fool. Matthew declared a fool a person who failed to see that Jesus was the bridegroom come to receive his bride. Paul referred to the fool who turned away from the gospel of grace to legalism and the worship of the creature rather than the Creator. Jesus referred to the fool who builds his house on the sand rather than the solid rock. Jesus also warned about the careless use of the word in a derogatory or abusive way. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka," which means worthless, "is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell." Verse 13. "I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. Nobody remembered that poor man. So I've learned from this, said, wisdom is better than strength. But the poor man's wisdom is despised, and I also learned that wise words, they're not always heeded. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools." How loud you say it, how often you say it, it doesn't make it right. We've got a lot of people today, especially in politics, or people making political statements that don't understand what the Bible says. wisdom is better than weapons of war, but I also learned that godly wisdom can be overcome by a single fool. Now Solomon's going to make a sudden switch from the praise of wisdom to a warning about the dangers of foolish behavior. And that takes us to chapter 10. We'll love this one. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. And if you didn't know that, that's where that phrase, a fly in the ointment, came from. It was Solomon's way of saying a tiny bit of foolishness can destroy the powerful fragrance of one's dignity and integrity. The heart of the wise inclines to the right. The heart of the fool inclines to the left. That's not a political statement. God instituted a theocracy where he alone rules in his kingdom. You may have heard that saying, I can beat you with my left hand. It comes from a time when people considered left-handed to be the weak or the unskilled hand, and the right hand was the strong or skilled hand. Solomon's saying here that the wise tend to do the right things, the fools tend to do the left things or the wrong things. Verse 3, even as fools walk along the highway of life, they lack sense, and they show everyone just how stupid they are. So God's word clearly marks the narrow path of righteousness, and as people wander from it in sin and rebellion, God says they're demonstrating their foolishness. Fools don't have to try very hard to demonstrate their stupidity. If a ruler's anger rises against you, don't leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. In today's world, an example of an interpretation of this might be when your boss gets angry at you, just let it go. Don't let another person's actions determine your reaction. Maintain your composure. Remind yourself that you are in control of yourself. There is an evil that I've seen under the sun. It's the sort of error that arises from a ruler. You know, we put movie stars and athletes in these high places, and we put the doctors and the teachers and the street sweepers in the low places. But sometimes it's the hardworking people who produce the results and then lose their position. And then the less competent and the less qualified get promoted. A very common phrase that business people know well is called the Peter Principle. It was written in a book called The Peter Principle, and it says that people often rise to their level of incompetence. So it's a warning about giving people more credit than they deserve or they're capable of. So in verse 6, fools are put in many high positions while the rich occupy the low ones. He said, I've seen slaves on horseback and princes go on foot like slaves. So now Solomon comes back to his message that wisdom is skill for living. And so he says, first, apply wisdom to get the job done. He says, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. The wisdom is don't stand too close to the edge. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. So if you're taking down an old rock wall, watch out for snakes. Or as someone in our class once found out, if you're cleaning out the birdhouse of last year's nest, check before you stick your hand in there. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Quarry rock and trees have to fall somewhere when they're being cut. Chips have to spring somewhere when they're flying loose. Protect your eyes. Wear your goggles when you're edging. If the axe is dull and its edge unshapen, more strength is needed, but skill brings success. Duh. Duh. Sharpen your axe. Work smarter, not harder. Second Solomon says, use wisdom to control words. If a snake bites before it's charmed, the charmer doesn't get a fee. Solomon says those snake charmers are very clever people, but if they don't do what they know how to do, they get bit. And if they get bit, they might as well have not known what to do. And it's the same with us. If we don't use wisdom, the wisdom that God gives us, then we might as well not have had the wisdom in the first place. So the question for us for introspection today is, where are we not applying our God-given wisdom in our daily living? When should we anticipate not being surprised when the snake of life bites us? Verse 12, words from the mouth of the wise are gracious. Fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, their words are madness. And fools multiply their words. He says there's a danger in talking too much. At some point, you go beyond the wisdom of what you're saying. At some point, people quit listening to what you're saying. At some point, you may become injurious to yourself or others. At some point, you may begin to ruin your reputation. Or as we heard in that cowboy quote the other day, speak more and say less. It's better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. But I can tell you, no one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone what else is going to happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They don't know the way to town. Thirdly, he says, use wisdom when leading and guiding others. Woe to the land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at the proper time and for strength and not for drunkenness. Eat to live, not live to eat. People who can't control their appetites at the table probably can't control their other appetites either, and that conflicts with good leadership. So he says, exercise self-discipline, govern well. Verse 18, through laziness the rafters sag, because of idle hands the house leaks. The roof leaks, he says, the bills pile up. The picture is this couch potato watching TV rather than being a good steward of the responsibility for home or work that he's been given. He says a feast is made for laughter, wine for life merry, and money is the answer for everything. And he says, if you believe this, I have a bridge I want to sell you. You hear the sarcasm in Solomon's voice? After this investigation that Solomon has done, his conclusion certainly isn't that money solves all the problems. And eating and drinking don't wash away all the cares of this world. And then he's got another last application of wisdom here. He says, apply wisdom in withholding criticism. Don't revile the king even though he's in your thoughts. Don't curse the rich in your bedroom. There may be a bird in the sky carrying your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you've been saying. We know that. A little birdie told me so. Or we say, the walls have ears. So don't say things in private that you don't want to be said in public. Some of you may remember Sam Rayburn, who was the Speaker of the House. He was from Bonham, Texas. He said, among my most prized possessions are words that I never spoke. One story I read this week was about a man who walked into a convenience store and he put a $20 bill on the table, on the counter, and he asked for change. And when the clerk opened the register, the man pulled a gun and said, I want all the money in your drawer. So the man gave it to him. He grabbed the money and he left the $20 bill on the counter. And when he got outside, he had gotten $15. We say, what a fool. What a fool. But the message from Solomon is a reflection on how humans exchange God's wisdom for man's foolishness. James 1:5 says, but if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And that's the lesson for this week. Bună ziua.